watershed projects. There a delay again? Here we go. I'll start with a basic definition. What is an invasive species? It is an alien or non-native species whose introduction does or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. The key word is harm. Many non-native species are not invasive. So what kind of harm are we talking about? Invasive species can harm habitats. They displace native species, impede fish passages, and impact other organisms, including mammals, birds, and insects. The top left photo should be waterfowl nesting habitat, but the purple loosestrife has displaced the native wetland species. The bottom right photo is either Bohemian or Japanese knotweed. That site should be willow and other native shrub species. There have been studies that show the insects that feed and live in invasive species, such as knotweed or bird cherry in Anchorage, may not be the same insect species living in the native riparian areas. Those insects need to fall into the stream to become fish food. Some invasive species may host similar insects, but not in the same abundance as the native trees and shrubs. In its native range, Japanese knotweed naturally destabilizes stream banks as a strategy to spread populations. The other two photos are Himalayan blackberry and English ivy, both displacing and covering native species. Sometimes the impact can be physically blocking what should be an open channel. The lower right photo is reed canary grass on stream channel banks. When this species becomes established in the channel, it can physically block fish passage, it can change the water flow, or sediment can increase, and the natural gravel stream bottom becomes mud. The upper left should be a gravel bar, but has become stabilized by sweet clover. There are also indirect impacts, such as some of the upland terrestrial species that can impact water runoff, soil erosion, wildlife habitat, and pollinators. The lower left photo shows orange hawkweed starting to displace the native wildflower meadow. Another example of reed canary grass impacts. Here's a wetland swamp at the head of Lake Louise in Kodiak's Buskin watershed. This photo shows the dead reed canary grass after the first chemical treatment. This photo shows the same Lake Louise wetlands. There's still scattered reed canary grass plants, which you can see as the brighter green, light green blades and tall seed heads throughout this area. But you can also see the native wetland plants reestablishing. We've been working hard to eradicate this infestation and recover the aquatic habitat in this salmon-rich watershed. We'd be very discouraged if the culvert project immediately upstream of this site were to introduce a new problem or delay progress. This is not a road map of Alaska, but it could be. This is from the Alaska Exotic Plants Information Clearinghouse, or ACEPIC, showing invasive plant survey results. Roadways and vehicles are known vectors of invasive plant spread. Streams crossing under roadways are vulnerable to introductions. For anybody interested in reading more about what to do along roadways, there are published best management practices available. But I'm here to talk about our stream crossing sites, not the whole highway. So which of these points are important to our projects? We need to identify some of the routes and methods that invasive species can be introduced to your stream crossing project. Shoes, boots, gravel, soil erosion prevention wattles, equipment, veg mats. Not only do you have all those transportation and introduction possibilities, but construction sites also have awesome habitat for establishment of invasive species, bare soil. Besides the necessary reseeding after and erosion control during the project, there are practices that can be included in construction contracts and activities that can help prevent your stream crossing project from spreading existing infestations or becoming the source of new infestations, starting at the planning stages. Know what to expect. One resource is the online ACEPIC database. Check the database, but don't rely on it to have the complete picture of what is or might be at your site. Consult with the local acronyms, including Soil and Water Conservation District, Tribal Conservation District, Cooperative Weed Management Area, Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area, and other groups that may be performing invasive species work in your area. Do your own survey. When you walk the site to determine fish passage needs, add an awareness of the vegetation into your list of site conditions. Pre-project surveys can let you know what to be prepared for. Don't just look at the fish and channel structure, identify plants too. This would also be a good time to identify potential veg mat sources. There are laws and regulations that address invasive species, but don't rely on state regulations to cover everything. A regulation won't clean your equipment. This is the current list of prohibited and restricted noxious weeds in Alaska. This list is housed within the Division of Agriculture seed regulations. It is a list of seeds to protect agriculture, not plants to keep away from construction sites. Notice Japanese and Bohemian knotweed is not included. There are other regulations concerning aquatic invasive species with a nice summary listed on the Alaska Department of Fish and Game website. As you write your plans and scope of work documents, you can require the use of certified weed-free materials. Alaska has a weed-free gravel and forage certification program. It is still growing and not yet available across the whole state. Here's a list of species that are currently not allowed in certified gravel. Note the extra species added to be certified in Alaska. If Alaskan certified materials are not available, then you must consider whether you want to require that they purchase and ship in certified straw wattles and other material from another state, or if you should require weed-free only if available and allow them to use local uncertified material. Uncertified materials could be cleaned, but just not inspected. There are a few other items you can write into your scope of work. In this example, project-specific special provisions were added to the Alaska DOT standard specifications. Some of those special provisions include items such as wash equipment prior to mobilization. Section 218, provide seed tags showing seed purity. Section 621, plant approved vegetation only. Section 640, another requirement to pressure wash all equipment. And then section 690, follow up after the project is completed to conduct weed control if necessary. Those are just a few examples. Your contracts may differ. Now that you have invasive species prevention in the plans, what next? Meetings. Review and remind about invasive species during pre-construction and pre-work meetings. Review and remind again when you meet with the contractor and other participants on site. Remember, you'll have more than the main construction contractor and subcontractors. There will be inspectors, landowners, project funders, engineers, surveyors, newspaper and radio reporters. Each and every one of them will be wearing boots, driving vehicles, and have the potential to carry seeds and plant parts. I would also suggest putting the wash requirement on the drawing. Unfortunately, that advice is from experience on one of our projects. We did include a note about materials on the drawing, but not the cleaning requirement. Some of the crew only saw drawings and not the full specs. Apparently, they didn't get the word from the boss, so they showed up with mud on their tracks. In this particular location, we did allow them to clean on site. The boss made them scrape the material, contain it, and dispose of it off-site. Here's another example. Even though this contractor knew the requirements, he did not follow the specs and arrived on site with dirty equipment. You can actually see roots and plant parts in that clump of dried mud. And another enforcement of the specs issue. This seed mix was left over from another project and the contractor wanted to use it on our site. If I remember correctly, that bag may have been okay after I inspected the label, but I said no to another mix when they picked up a bag from the local hardware store that contained inappropriate species. So you required equipment cleaning and the use of weed-free products. You checked the veg mat source and seed label. You have enforced the specs to the best of your team's abilities. Construction is completed. What next? Post-project surveys. Not only do you need to know that the structure or new channel is performing as designed, but you want to know that your project has not contributed a new problem to the area. Just as you did for the pre-project survey, when you survey the site to admire the new fish-friendly structure, Add an awareness of the vegetation into your list of site conditions. You can't control all situations. Even state noxious weed regulations allow for a slight percent of weed seed. And seeds do blow in the wind, or maybe something drops off a passing vehicle. There will be times when the contractor does arrive with dirty equipment, or the material was contaminated, or some other issue occurred. Then you realize how important post-project surveys are. We practiced early detection rapid response and manually pulled these non-native plants before they could go to seed and spread further. Physically pulling single plants is much more effective than waiting and allowing them to go to seed or spread their roots. Remember the reed canary grass in the Lake Louise wetland? This is the culvert just upstream. We did find a few stems of reed canary grass in the seeded area. Because this was within the area of our pre-existing project, the Soil and Water Conservation District already had permits and a landowner agreement lined up, so we were able to apply chemical control to these plants. Unfortunately, also at this site in the upper right photo, the veg mat material was contaminated and the stream banks now have creeping buttercup. I put plug in here for native forb species. It would be great to include some forbs with our grass mixes. Remember the talk on the first day throughout this workshop about riparian functional process and other organisms outside of the immediate stream channel. If you purchase seeds, be careful and do your homework. So-called wildflower seed mixes, even if they say made for Alaska, are not necessarily native Alaska species. The source of this oxeye daisy field was a well-meaning person spreading wildflower seed mix after construction. Another personal example, someone on our team purchased lupin seed from a local store, labeled for Alaska. The seed packet was actually supplied out of Colorado and was an East Coast species. We did not plant it. Or you could consider local sources and collect your own seeds. This was a project in Kodiak's Buskin watershed a few years ago. The US Coast Guard pulled out culverts along an abandoned road, reshaped the banks, and installed locally sourced veg mats to US Fish and Wildlife Service design specs. Then we used volunteers to transplant nearby elderberry and vegetation plugs to the upper slopes. They also scooped up ground litter with leaves and pushki seeds and spread it on the old roadbed. No invasive species and happy fish habitat. There are many websites for more information. I'm sure I missed a few and don't expect you to scribble them down before I click to the next slide. The alaskainvasives.org site is a good place to start with links to other sites. With proper planning, best management practices, and follow through, you can prevent the spread and impacts of invasive species in your stream crossing project.